Hello everybody, my name is Jason Miller, and I want to thank you very much for having me to your FlightSimExpo here this afternoon. It's been really educational for me to walk around and see everything that's going on in the world of flight sims. I'm actually still trying to get my head around who we have here, so if y'all don't mind, how many people here in the group today are using simulators for actual flight training or thinking about being pilots in the real world? All right, cool. And the rest of you, I'm going to assume how many folks are just using it for fun. This is like an awesome way to entertain myself. Excellent. How many folks are actually already certificated pilots? Wow. All right, that's cool. That was by far the biggest group, by the way. And I was out there, it's been 25 years since I've used a flight simulator. And I just did it next door in the room. I think I was using, is it Infinite Flight? Is that the iOS one? And I'll have you know, I landed a TBM 850. So I am living proof right here in front of you today that you can use actual airplanes to learn how to fly flight sims. I am actually one of you all though. You know, when I was 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, I don't want to date myself here, but the first flight simulator that I used was SubLogic. Does anyone remember that old like two-tone kind of thing? My brother thought I was crazy. I used to fly a Cessna real-time from Chicago Meigs Field to New York on that little two-tone thing. So I remember when that became the Microsoft Flight Simulator, and before I moved to California, I was doing a lot of flying on it in the Bay Area, so I can really relate to the feeling of showing up somewhere in the real world, somewhere I've never been before, and feeling like I've flown there already. You know, looking out, even with the horrible graphics we had back then, my old floppy disk and my Apple IIe, I had felt like I'd flown in San Francisco. But now, that was years ago for me, that was 25 years ago, and as the video you just saw mentioned, what I do today is I teach flying almost every day of the week. I am a professional flight instructor, and I'm constantly in real airplanes with real students. Because I've been doing it for a long time, I charge a lot of money for what I do out there. The airplanes are very expensive, and I continually have the experience of looking at my students who are paying $270 an hour for the airplane and $100-something an hour for me, and thinking to myself, boy, they should be using simulators, right, if they're really serious about training. So really what I'm talking to you about today, before we bring my friend Steve up to talk from his perspective, what I'm going to try to tell you about a little bit is how you can most effectively use those simulators in real world training. And the first thing that I tell pilots, whether they're using simulators or not, when they come in to learn how to fly, I'll generally tell them that actually flying the airplane is probably 20% of the challenge. So the journey that they're embarking on, learning how to become a pilot, flying the airplane is really the least of it. We'll learn how to fly the airplane, I will teach them how to control the airplane, but really, we could get that done in 15, 20 hours, just the basics, right? The hard part, to become a really precision pilot, is all about standardization. And if you take your game to the next level, if you're going to be an airline pilot, if you're going to be a military pilot, if you're going to be a cargo pilot, if you just want to be an awesome pilot, you have to learn how to standardize your behavior in the airplane. And I think that this is an area where flight simulators can just earn their weight in gold. And what we're going to talk about here, I'm going to give you some specifics. I hope this isn't too nerdy for you, but I'm literally going to walk you through a flight and give you exact areas of flight training where I think standardization is important. And it's not just me that thinks so. I can relate it back to the FAA. You know, to get your pilot certificate, we have to use the Airman Certification Standards. And the FAA has really tightened the screws on the Airman Certification Standards, and they've really gone after a more professional approach. So if you look at, just as an example, if you look at the taxi task, where it says, you know, is this pilot, you got an examiner sitting next to you someday, looking at the pilot there, saying, is this pilot taxiing properly, or as per the ACS task? There's a note in there now that says they must have and use a taxi diagram, they must brief the taxi route. So half of my battle as an instructor when I'm sitting next to a student who's, you know, taxiing is not necessarily is this person able to hold the center line, it's does this person have the discipline to get the taxi clearance, pull out a taxi diagram, brief me on the taxi route, all these little standardized behaviors, those are the things that, in my opinion, will make or break a check ride, for example, and will also, down the road, contribute to safety. So let's talk about some of the areas where that shows up straight away. Engine start, right? So these are some of the obvious things, right? So I think the main point I'm trying to make is to disassociate initially from using the simulator as a tool to fly. And I know that's not good news for all the sim pilots. Everybody, the first thing they want to do is fly the airplane in the sim. But the first thing I'll tell my students if they're using a sim is put it on autopilot, don't try to fly it. It's not an airplane. It won't, well, I don't want to say it won't ever act like an airplane. I think we're getting closer and closer and closer when I see what's going on out here to building simulators that do in fact act like airplanes. But for the most part, the simulators folks are using, you're better off thinking of it as a procedural trainer. And before I actually get into the specifics, I just wanted to point out that if you were on a path to professionalism, they would put you in what's called a procedural trainer. If you're a military pilot, an airline pilot, anything like that, they'll put you in a procedural trainer before they let you into the simulator, before they let you into the airplane. So you have to be able to sit down, and a procedural trainer is just a simple mock-up. It's a cardboard mock-up of the cockpit. And you've got to be able to sit there and look at your start checklist and know where all the buttons are. If it were the military, they'd probably want you to do that blindfolded and know where things are, to know what your flow checks are, to know what the checklist says, not just for start, but for all the emergencies and all this training that can be done before you ever even get to the simulator. Then, once you prove that you've got that stuff down, they'll let you go into the simulator, where you can then put that stuff to practice in maybe a full motion combo level D simulator. Then once you prove you got it there, they'll let you get out to the airplane. And this is not the sexy stuff. This isn't particularly fun. But when I'm sitting next to a pilot that's paying $500 an hour for flight training, this is the stuff that burns the clock. This is the stuff where when we start up that airplane and you're on my dime and the meter's running on the plane and they go, okay, now, let's see, fuel pump, where's the fuel pump, right? Like, we just burned $25 looking for that fuel pump, right? So if you're really concerned about streamlining the cost of training and being effective, we're gonna talk about the ways you can do that. So like we said, engine start is an obvious one. Know where those buttons are. But then, a good idea for anybody that is using a simulator for training is to go ahead and download the ACS, the Airman Certification Standards, and just walk through it. The next task is taxi. So you get that taxi clearance, and you want to make sure each time that you brief your passengers, you have a legal responsibility to brief your passengers, so give them a passenger briefing, get your taxi clearance, look at your taxi route, brief the taxi route, literally say it out loud as if you're procedurally training, right? You're here in this simulator as a kind of a gym to build these muscles to get good at it. Then you pull forward, make sure you check your brakes. That's listed in the ACS. Did this applicant ask the examiner to check brakes? Make sure you do that. While you're taxiing, make sure you're checking those turning instruments. You know, is your heading indicator increasing when you turn to the right? Is it decreasing when you turn to the left? Is the attitude indicator staying stable? Finally, you get out to the run-up area. You sit there, park the airplane there for a minute, and go through the full engine run-up, right? Just like it says on the checklist. Before you depart, you want to do a pre-takeoff briefing. Right? We haven't even come close to flying the airplane yet. But I promise you've got a month's worth of work to do right there in the simulator, right? That's a lot of repetition and a lot of practicing, and that's the stuff. This is what I'm telling you from the right seat, from 20 years of doing it. That's the stuff that will streamline the time, that will make the lesson go faster, will save you hundreds and hundreds of dollars in training, will also have it reflect when the examiner sits down next to you, they're gonna look at you and say, wow, this person's sharp, they're on it. They asked me to check my brakes, they're doing briefings, they're, all this pre-takeoff briefing and stuff like that, right? It's not that no examiner is gonna sit there and go, wow, look how smooth they are on the rudders, like during the taxi. Look how smooth and effectively they brake. Maybe they will. They'll notice if you're riding the brakes. But there we are in the run-up area, and now we're getting in front of the airplane. We're thinking, okay, we do a pre-takeoff briefing. We get on the runway. We can practice our takeoff call-outs, power set, gauges checked, airspeed alive, VR, rotate, right? All the stuff you're going to do on the climb out. Remember to keep a sterile cockpit. That is, don't talk about anything else until you're up to 1,000 feet. and now you're flying out to the practice area. On your way out, I teach my students for every climb, at this point the engine's running, they should be doing a flow check to make sure that they didn't miss anything for the climb. And in a single pilot environment, as a second step, they should back that up with a written checklist. I'm so adamant about this with my students that I literally keep notes on how many they hit and how many they miss. I've got a little shorthand for it, so that I can tell them at the end of any given flight, you hit 42% of your checklists, but only 30% were backed up, right? So the way for them to get good at it is not to go, oh man, I only hit 42%, well hopefully I'll do better next week. No, the way the military would approach it is to go sit them down in a room in front of a picture of the cockpit, or better yet, a flight simulator, a PC-based flight simulator, and practice it. Just climbing out to the practice area, running my flow check, doing my checklist. I level off for cruise flight. I run my flow check. I do my checklist. Starting a descent, I run my flow check. I do my checklist. Don't underestimate the significance of this behavior in the airplane. It's critical. I joke with my students when they come in. I say, I have two goals for you. One is that you pass your check ride on the first attempt. The second is that you never die in an airplane. And those goals are aligned. They're one and the same. The things that I'm teaching there about flow checks and checklists not only will have them acing check rides, have examiners like building a story in their head that this pilot is exceedingly well prepared, but it will also have them be the first person on board the day they look at the engine gauges and the oil pressure is starting to fail, right? Or the ammeter has gone to the negative side of 0. So these behaviors are critical. There was an airline pilot, Al Haynes, the captain of United 232, if anyone's familiar with that crash, but he went around and did a lecture series talking about how on the day of the accident, the entire crew, and keep in mind this is a two-person crew, very different from a single pilot environment, but the entire crew that day behaved like a well-oiled machine, and he had never met them. Not any of them, not the first officer, not Danny Fitch, like he didn't even know him before that day. And he credits United Airlines and their standardization program and the procedures that they teach. So the stuff that I'm talking about to my students is stuff that, I didn't make it up, right? I just borrow it from the professional world. And this is the direction the FAA is trying to take general aviation. They're trying to really tighten the screws and bring us more toward a professional type training environment. And this is where simulators really come into play. And notice I have not talked yet about which one flies the best or most realistically. Right? That, at this point yet, is still not that important to you. If we're going out to the practice area to just do some maneuvers, and I've had this conversation with a couple people here today when I'm walking around the hall, I say things like, well, is there anybody out there in the simulator world that's sort of teaching like I'm talking here, that's just sort of doing day 1, day 2 lesson, day 3 lesson, day 4. Today we're going out to the practice area to work on stalls. And when I start talking about that, what most people hear is, well, the simulator doesn't really behave like an airplane, right? Like, everybody's thinking flying. But I can tell you that's really, again, that's 20% of the problem. The things that people miss, in my experience, when I'm doing phase checks, or if I'm talking to examiners, the things that people miss when they go out to do a stall series is they forget to lean the mixture, or they'll forget to do a clearing turn, right? These are the things where the examiner starts thinking, oh man, we're fully ridged, we're at 5,000 feet, we're gonna follow the spark plugs, we didn't do any clearing turns, this guy could run into another airplane, so it doesn't matter how awesome your stall was. And to be quite honest, stalling assessment is not all that hard. Like, we'll figure that part out. So again, the place you can practice this is in your simulator. You can go out to the practice area, even if you're on autopilot. Like, even if you just have one that doesn't behave very much like an airplane. Better if it does, I suppose. All it will do if it behaves a lot like an airplane is sort of load up your processor a little bit more realistically, where you have to divide your attention between one of the things I'm talking about and maybe holding altitude. But if flying the sim becomes so much of a challenge that a large majority of your attention is going toward flying, I would say put it on autopilot. Abandon that part of it for the purposes of what I'm talking about, for the purposes of training, speeding up your training, and maybe going for some more precise training. So you can go out, say, on your stall series, and get to 5,000 feet, do your flow check, lean your mixture, run through your checklist, do a clearing turn, 90 degrees to the left like the FAA says, and then 90 degrees back on heading. even say to yourself, okay, then I did a stall. You don't even have to do it. You can do it if you want. If you have a sim that's good, some of these are pretty amazing. If you've got one you think is up for it, do a stall. But if not, if it's going to be a big thing, just, okay, I did a stall. Stall's over, another flow check, another checklist. What's next, Jason, or what's next, examiner? And eventually you turn around and fly back to the airport. The examiner or check pilot, or if you're ever flying with me, we're going to be looking for things like, did you do an arrival briefing? Did you consider how long the runway is? Did you do a GUMPS check? Gas, undercarriage, mixture, propeller, power, pumps, seatbelt security, before landing checklist. Did you do a descent check? And none of this, again, relates to how were you able to fly your simulator? So, I don't want to beat a dead horse there, but I think that kind of wraps up the VFR point that I'm trying to make, which is the simulator has an incredible value as a procedural trainer, and that's an area where I see most pilots sort of blow it off. And we as CFIs will coach people and say, hey, do some couch flying, is what we call it, or do some dry time. Come down to the airport on a Saturday and sit in the airplane, but don't start the engine, because this stuff's expensive. And this is where a good simulator set up at home and a disciplined usage of it for the purposes of flight training can make a huge impact. Because if you're doing all that stuff in the sim, and then you do go out on your lesson, it's going to be in your primacy. It's going to be in your, there's two laws of learning that are real powerful here. One is the law of primacy. The way you do it the first time is the way you'll tend to remember it. And then the law of exercise. The way you practice something is the way you're going to perform something, right? So those are powerful laws of learning, and you can use a simulator for that. One other point that I want to make before we bring up Steve Thorne is about IFR flying. Is anybody flying IFR or just thinks about flying IFR in the sim? Okay. This is an area where I would say feel free to use the simulator, and I just want to admit to everybody in the room that in today's world, with today's avionics, if I'm getting a brand new instrument student, we use the autopilot in the airplane to start. So the first third of training, we will be flying the airplane on autopilot. We will be using, if it's got a fancy GPS system, we will be talking about programming the GPS. We will put the airplane on autopilot, and we will both watch the airplane fly the flight. Because the hard part about instrument flying is not any one task, right? There's this old analogy about instrument flying, or this old image people use where they say, flying instruments is a little bit like a juggler, and you can get 3 or 4 or 5 balls going in the air, and someone throws you a 6th ball, you can even maybe get that one going because you're the best juggler in the world, and maybe you got 7 balls going, and eventually someone throws you a ball, and you don't miss that last ball, but the whole house of cards comes down, right? All 7 balls hit the floor, and you can't even remember your name, right? I joke with students, there will come a point where I'll ask you what your name is, and you will turn to me and say, stand by, right? You won't even be able to hear that question, and that's an important place to find in instrument training. So what you want to focus on more in instrument training is a system, a method by which you can process that information, a way to think in front of the airplane. So if you've got a complicated departure procedure, for example, San Carlos has one where we take off, San Carlos, California, where we take off and we have to climb straight ahead to 1,100 feet, and then we have to make a right turn to a certain heading, so we cross a radial. Then we go up to 2,100, we contact departure, and by 5 minutes later we have to go up to 5,000. There's a whole procedure involved with it. Again, don't waste too much of your attention in the simulator trying to fly that and hold those altitudes precisely within 50 feet or 100 feet. That's kind of a waste of that juggling energy. What would be a better use is to go ahead and put it on autopilot, hold those altitudes, and start thinking in front of the airplane. Okay, so in 1 mile, I'm going to have to turn right. When I get there, I'll be turning this thing, and then I'll be climbing, and I'll have to enrich the mixture, and maybe hit the fuel pump, and I'll have to run my checklist, and practice thinking in front of the airplane with all the little points that you'll have to encounter on an IFR flight. All right, do you guys have any questions for me about anything that I've said so far? Yeah?
One other thing I might throw in for VFR that sounds really helpful is head tracker.
Which is it, sorry?
Head tracking device.
Okay, awesome.
To be able to fly a pattern, basically.
Okay, so yeah, the gentleman up front was saying that one thing he finds really valuable is a head tracking device. I'm not too familiar. Does that, by the way, record where you're looking and when you're looking there?
Yeah, it's a little camera. Track IR? Track IR.
Track IR. There's ways, yeah. Interesting. Okay, that's awesome. All right, so I'm going to kind of, if I can figure out how to work this computer, I am going to play you guys a little video. Now, a lot of you know FlightChops, right? You thought you were coming here to see a FlightChops talk, didn't you? Anyway, Steve flies more makes and models than anybody I know. And if you're familiar with the FlightChops channel, you're familiar with where it started and kind of the whole debriefing angle. And I'm going to play you a little sizzle video here just in case you're not familiar with who Steve Thorne is. But what I'd like to do now is bring up Steve and have him talk to you about the power of the simulator when it comes to debriefing your flights.
Worked hard to get here. A few times screwed up. I started with simple self-analysis videos that I shared with friends, and the reaction was great, and FlightChops was born.
Creating content for FlightChops has taken me places I never imagined.
It is a beautiful night for fun.
Allowing me to fly dozens of types of aircraft.
Is this a little more comfortable for you? Oh, it's comfortable. The good news is I don't really have a comfort zone, so I'm doing so much crazy stuff all the time.
Meet some amazing people and achieve some incredible things along the way.
Congratulations, Steve Chops. You passed your rescue swimmer survival qualification today.
My end goal has always been to get checked out in a Spitfire. And with each new aircraft I log time in, it feels like it's getting closer and closer to becoming a reality. Some of the adventures I've been a part of have taken me far from the flight line, while always keeping aviation at the core.
Why am I doing that?
Well, that's a good cut right there.
Giving me the opportunity to share my love of flying with my family.
That was so fun.
All in all, it's a dream come true.
You guys are like connected. It's crazy.
It's entirely thanks to the flying community, and I'm happy to share every step of it.
You guys done it. Now you gotta go sit and back in the template, so.
Is that working? All right. Yeah, so I mean, when I get invited to these things, I often first ask myself, how am I qualified to talk to a bunch of people that are expert in something? Because you guys are all clearly sim experts. I don't really fly a ton of sims. I started with sims, definitely as a kid, and that was a real dream to start getting into flying. But exactly what Jason said, the sim is such a tool to start and really get yourself prepared to do it. And so flying so many types, what my channels allow me to do, really hit home for me how powerful a tool can be that helps you figure it out. Because you can't just jump into an airplane, or at least you shouldn't, without knowing where the switches are, you know what I mean? You're not necessarily going to know how it's going to respond, like Jason was saying, how it flies, how it feels. That's going to change each time you get into something different. The fundamentals, what I've been able to carry forward throughout all the different types. It's interesting because every time I do one of these things, the pit special was the one that I thought, this is the one, I'm going to call him a bluff on it. Because the instructor said, I'm going to put you right in the back seat right away. Like, I've seen your videos, I know you can do it. And I was like, I mean, you guys all know what a pit special is? It's like the really snappy little biplane the air shows. It's arguably one of the hardest airplanes to control on the ground. Although now that I've flown a T6, I can say it's a different battle, but it's also that I think the T6 is probably harder. But at the end of the day, showing up to that airplane, I was like, this is the one. Like, he's going to throw me the backseat over the ground with this thing. It's going to go badly. But really, I could do it, I think, because I took a lot of experience from a lot of types that erased a lot of muscle memory that I think, I've got a friend of mine who, when our flight school had a constant speed prop PA-28, like a Warrior, he didn't want to fly that until he mastered the 172, is what he said to me. And I was like, well, that to me seems like, first of all, you're never going to master 172 as a weekend warrior. You're never going to master anything. I mean, what you need 10,000 hours to be an expert in anything? Is that the everyone says? Yeah. So for me, like, I feel like the only thing I can maybe say I've got that many hours logged in is filmmaking. That's what I do. So flying for fun was always what I liked about flying. So to be able to marry filmmaking and flying was kind of my sort of passion. So I was like, I'm never going to be an expert pilot. Never. I'll never get to 10,000 hours logged. But not allowing myself to be handicapped by that sort of belief that some people have of, try to master one thing. It's like, I'm just trying to be a jack of all trades and take different experiences to all different types. And so far it's worked, but I do prepare. I don't show up unprepared for an airplane that I'm not familiar with. And for me, it's all been about the debriefing. So Jason kind of talked about preparing yourself before the flight. But for me, when I got a GoPro, there was a period of my life where I got my license in '96, didn't maintain my hours more than a college student could at the time. So around the year 2000, I was finding like I'm running out of missions here. I'm just flying 172 and doing city tours in Toronto. And pattern is when I'm realizing it's almost the end of the month and I'm not current, but let my currency lapse. So there came a time when I got the wife and the house and the kid. All of a sudden, between 2004 and 2009, I hadn't flown at all. So I was about to completely let that whole thing go, and trying to find a mission or some excuse to get back into it. I looked at Sims and I started thinking about it. What it really did for me was my wife said, "You got to get back into this. You're going to drop it altogether." And it was a GoPro and an iPad. Because during that period of time, between 2004 and 2009, GoPros happened and iPads happened, and that changed everything to me about flying. Because I never loved paper charts. To me, flying sucked when I had to do math and just draw and drop a pencil and try to do my diversion, training and on paper. Once it came down to it, now I have a moving map, and it's backed up on my phone, so you can't say it's not safe or the argument. When I started doing it, that was the big argument was you can't use an iPad as your thing because you don't back up on paper. That's not the case anymore. It's legally fine to do that. So I had that awesome tool, and then I had a GoPro. I would film my flying and review it. Because it's expensive to get to an airplane, like Jason was saying. But I can go home and watch my footage and realize whoa, that landing that I thought was good actually sucked. Or wow, I missed that. Why did the controller sound mad at me? Because that was the second time he was calling me. But I didn't notice it at the time because I missed it obviously, but looking back at it and debrief, you catch it. I think Sims are an awesome tool for that. And how many of you guys use the Sims to debrief what you do? So how do you do that? You just look at a replay and, yeah. So talking to some of you guys about that's a lot of things you do to catch a mistake or what happened there, why did those two airplanes conflict? This whole thing about the live ATC stuff that you guys have going with Pilot Edge and stuff, that's freaking awesome. I think Keith, I don't know if he's out here somewhere, but Keith from Pilot Edge, I'm going to work with him and get my instrument. so for me, I don't know how many of y'all know that my biggest battle has been trying to get my instrument rating simply because it's hard to fit in traditional training into, at this point, this is my job, so I'm always all over the place doing crazy training in different places and traveling and making films, so it's hard to lock into the zone of what it takes to do instrument training. I've probably gotten myself 85% of the way to the rating 3 times in the past 3 years. Jason's helped me. And then I'm almost there, and then I get super busy, and then 3 months go by, it's ugh. So yeah, I need to set myself up with a sim at home so I can do this stuff, work on better instrument training and really knock it out, because that's what I need. That's my next thing I need to do. This summer was Warbirds, and the T6 was the latest thing that I can't believe I got to the point of flying that thing. I'm not a highly experienced pilot, but it can be done. So that's sort of where I come from with this whole thing.
I had a question for you actually, Steve, if
Yeah.
you had a minute. Excuse me, but I know you use CloudAhoy a lot. Can you talk a little bit about how you do it? I've tried and it's not, I don't know, I just tend to be so much more seat of my pants. But I would imagine that a lot of simulators have similar kinds of data.
Right, so there's an app called CloudAhoy that you can take via a GPS track log from any device, whether it's your Garmin watch, your iPad, anything that got your track log, you can import it into this CloudAhoy, which essentially generates what most sims will generate, a complete track log, 3-dimensional, that you can look at from any angle. You can pause it, you can rewind it, you can play it in real time. So it's really awesome so I used it for the T6 checkout to look at how good was I doing with holding my altitude and making my steep turns, and how nice were my patterns, and I look back at it in Cloudaway. So to me, that sort of stuff is like, in the real moment, as much as you can have the instructor give you feedback and what you're doing wrong or what you're doing right, I mean, stuff is coming at you, right? Especially in an airplane like the T6, which is just a monster. It's so loud, there's so much going on. So the debrief is key, and to have something like a tool that lets you look at the track log, pause it, rewind it, figure out where you went wrong, and if you can replay your audio, because I always record the intercom, so I have my ATC communications as well as the intercom, talking to the instructor or just myself. When I'm solo, I completely talk through all my procedures out loud, as if my instructor's beside me, because I just don't trust myself not to do it the way I always do it, like Jason was saying. Most of my time is spent with instructors because I'm flying so many types, so when I'm solo, I just pretend there's an instructor with me.
Yeah, question.
Yep.
Steve, fun fact about Cloudaway. It actually does work with simulated data as well. So I use whoa. Yours is much louder. So I use we stream on Twitch. So my flights are essentially recorded in a format that I can download and upload to YouTube. And the Cloudaway tool allows you to upload that YouTube as the footage, right? So you have the video. I now have the video of my footage with the audio. It also imports data from FlightSimExpo, and I have my sim connected to FlightSimExpo. So I have all the sim analytics, metrics, data, speeds, altitudes, etc., being pulled in from the recorded FlightSimExpo tool, plus the audio, plus the video, and I can do a full debrief, pretty much exactly like yours, but in a simulated world.
Yeah, see, that's awesome.
And it's really cool.
Yeah. So you can bring it back. Can you hear me all right? Because I just realized that mic is a lot louder, but y'all are fine it back? Yeah, okay, cool. Yes, well, whatever, I mean, it's fine. Yeah, so at the end of the day, debriefing is a huge tool, and I think it's a waste. I have a lot of friends who go flying and they hang up the keys and go for a beer meeting afterwards, and they think, they wrote one line in their logbook, 4 landings, they were good, or whatever. I used to, before I got into this stuff, I used to write a paragraph or more of notes for every flight about what the conditions were, what went wrong, what I thought went right, just because then I would refer back to it, 3 months, 6 months later, if it's a night flight or something, and this is the crosswind again, it's gusty. What was my last one? Oh, last one wasn't so gusty, this time it's gusting 25. Maybe I should go for that night flight, even though I'm current. So the debrief has been key to me to take notes like that. And what we're talking about is the same thing, where you know what you've done, you know where you're at, and it's a much easier way to quantify what you're capable of, where you can stand to improve. Yeah, I know I sort of was jamming, I don't know how much I can keep going, but if you guys want to bounce around some questions, or... Yeah, I don't know.
There you go.
You've flown a lot of aircraft. What was your favorite?
Yeah, I get asked that one a lot. It's really hard. I guess I'll put that in the same question of if you could buy an airplane, what would you buy? My answer is I would buy 4 airplanes. Because I want to go upside down. I want to go fast and far with people and luggage. I want to land on the water. And I want to be able to land on some crazy bush backcountry. And those are 4 different airplanes that you would need to do those things. So, and I like warbirds. I don't think I'd want to own one though. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, currently, I think the fact that I'm flying T6 now is something I never imagined would have even been remotely possible. So probably currently, I would have to say that I'm currently at the apex of that's awesome. The steering is also pretty amazing. Extra 300 is a cartoon. Well, I remember when I was doing my training on that, the first time we went to go invert it, I started talking through it. The instructor was like, so I need to pitch up a little bit, and he's like, you just flip it up. It takes about half a second, literally, because its roll rate is 360 degrees per second. Yep.
Having flown the T6 Texan, how does it compare to the A2A Texan?
To the which one?
A2A.
Oh, the sim?
Simulator.
I haven't flown the sim.
You've not flown?
I can't tell you. So, yeah, I'm not a sim expert.
Where does one find the A2A version? Is it in all?
Yeah, A2A makes the flight models for different planes. Yeah. Oh, we got a question here. So sorry, I can't answer that.
I'm wondering, number one, did the issue with the Super Cub's propeller ever get fixed, and how often do you fly the Super Cub?
Yeah, so that backstory, there was a Super Cub that I started my training on that somebody prop struck the absolute crap out of it. It was the most amazing prop strike that any of us had ever heard of. Someone like drove it into a fuel pump that had those metal bollards that have concrete poured into them, and he managed to hit it in such a way that the base of the prop hit, and it stopped the engine instantly, and the other side of the prop bent from inertia alone. So it was, the AV said, I've never seen a prop like this bad. And it turned the entire engine mount to a pretzel. Amazingly, the fuselage didn't get bent. So I actually just flew that airplane again for the first time like 2 weeks ago, because it got absorbed into a private flying mode after it got fixed. So I will be putting a video that shows it got restored really nicely by some private guys. But it was amazing. The crankshaft was obviously destroyed. Amazingly, nothing else broke in that engine. But the flange that holds the prop, the bolts actually turned into like key weights. Like it bent so badly. It was unbelievable that a prop could stop instantly. And he was adding power because he thought he was going to turn. Because he didn't even see the fuel pump. He had the plane parked facing, so he just fueled. And that's a classic example of like situational awareness. Like take a minute before you get in the airplane, because you can't see what's in front of you in a Super Cub and you get right into it. This is a smaller guy. Yeah. So you got a question? Yeah.
What has been your the most surreal moment for you as a pilot?
Yeah, it sounds boring to say it, but the T6. That's why I put that in the video there. That moment after I took off in the T6, I said that to myself because I really meant it. It was like, now you've done it, now you gotta get this airplane on the ground by yourself. So I guess we all go through that when we solo. Anyone that's a real pilot, like real aircraft, probably that's that moment where you're like, can I do this? So that was for me that moment of like, wow, this just got real. Like a lot of the time, what I get to do on the channel is a glorified 5-year-old holding the wheel for a second, right? You know, I mean, yeah, I got some time in L39, but I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not really flying it. I'm on T6 by myself for the first time. I'm flying it. That's true. Yeah, I got a question, yeah?
Now, in all your videos, you have a mini camera setup, but if you were acting as a trainer and you could only have a one camera setup, what camera would you recommend at this point, or what class of cameras, and how would you set that up,
Sure.
like viewpoint for good procedure?
Just quickly for the next round, what type of airplane do you fly? Because that matters for that question.
So it's a U-60 Blackhawk, so two pilot aircraft, and we do have crew chiefs in the back, left and right side.
Yeah, the Blackhawk helicopter.
Yes.
Yeah, that is a tough one. I guess you could, at this point, I used to say you need 2 cameras at minimum because you can't get exposure on the view and the panel properly. But now the Garmin's are pretty good, and the new GoPros are pretty good about actually pulling off the exposure. So you can afford to put the wide shot over the shoulder that gets you the panel and your view. That will give you kind of, at a minimum, what you need, because I think that's minimally what you need. You need to see your panel, and I guess you'll see your control inputs to some extent with that shot over your shoulder. For me with tail wheel training though, I also had to get, I felt the need to see the tail wheel and the rudder, because really to see if you're over controlling or not, that was the place to put it too. So I started shooting 4 to 6 cameras when I was doing tail wheel training. But that's a bigger deal. So I got one in the back there first, yeah.
Hey, so I'm relatively new to my flying experience, and one of the things that I really love about your content is you show a lot of the interaction, the relationship between you and your instructor. So obviously someone like Jason, super awesome instructor. I'm excited to be here. But what are you looking for? What makes a really good instructor in your mind? What does a good student-instructor relationship look like? What are some of those things?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I fired my first 3 instructors when I started. Because I have a very specific kind of personality. I like to be real, and So there's some instructors that don't talk enough. I like feedback, but I also don't like too much. It's very personal. I think the real answer is it always matters based on your relationship. I think the most important thing about flight training, in my experience, has been the relationship between the student and the instructor, which isn't one size fits all. So I can't tell you what you should look for in an instructor other than finding someone that pushes you to do your best. So some guys that yell at you, just it's not good. Other people like that. The guy that I fly the T6 with, people joke in the comments that he's kind of hard on me. I like him, we get along, I'm okay with it. Like, he makes jokes about punching me in the back of the head if I do certain things. I know it's a joke, but I also don't want to break the airplane, so I don't. It's a vintage airplane, I mean, you know, so I don't mind that kind of hard-ass approach. But if I'm doing instrument training and we're in 172, I think we can chill a little bit and be more like Jason's approach. So it really depends on the situation of the student, but at the end of the day, it's probably the most important thing in your flight training is that relationship. Someone up here at the front wanted a question? Yeah.
What is the total time between you flying and then you getting the video out, like after editing and stuff? Because I've seen, you know, a few times, like you said you flew a while ago, but that video wasn't out yet. So what's kind of like the average time that it takes for you to fly and then to get that video out?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for the average video that I shoot, it would take typically a minimum of full-time week, 6 to 8 days of editing full-time. So if you, and then you're talking also the duration of when you shoot to when I publish. Yeah. So sometimes based on the backlog of footage, I've literally had a couple where it's been a year. In the case of like the mass arrival with the Cessnas to Oshkosh in 2016, published that right before Oshkosh 2017. It sounded like a good excuse to say I meant to do that, but the reality was it was just in the backlog for so long. It got to the point where I was like, this footage is 9 months old now. I might as well just wait until right before Osh 17 and publish it then. So I mean, it's a problem, but it's a good problem to have. That I literally at this point, I'm trying to publish one every 2 weeks or more often, and at any given time I'm sitting on like 10 or more unfinished episodes. It's a cool problem to have, but it's a problem. The T6 stuff I put kind of in the pipeline early just because I was so excited about it. But I was also using the editing process to debrief what is literally the most important, difficult training I've ever done. So I didn't want to be editing a video about something like a helicopter flight in New York when I'm training to fly a T6. I'm going to fly solo it next week. I was like, you know what? I'm sitting on all this footage in my last lesson. I should probably debrief the hell out of this. I'm just going to push those episodes forward. So in that case, the T6 one, I quickly turned those ones around just because I was doing the training at the same time. But it varies. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's a solid like 6 to 8 days of editing minimum prep. So how I can fit it in. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm still trying to formulate this question. I know my son Jake has been training, and he had an instructor. I remember my friend Deli Henriquez called him a yoke grabber.
Yeah.
Because I was in the back seat, and I kept grabbing the yoke, and my son was like, "Damn, the kid didn't even fly much." And we set him up with an instructor who was completely the opposite. He would just sort of, and he actually trained me for some checkouts on my twin, and he would just let me make mistakes. And he would let me land the plane, and sometimes I'd be struggling, and he would just let me go through it. What are your thoughts about that as instructors who kind of just sort of kick back, almost like they're not there, and just are confident enough to let you fly?
That is key, and that's why I joke with people that the instructors that I like to collaborate with typically have gray hair. I want those guys that will make you make mistakes. As a student, you're always going to be a little behind where the instructor's mind is, of course. But the instructors that correct it instantly, it's like, I know I was on that, but you just fix that, and then you give me the chance to either A, fix it myself, or B, see if the mistakes started happening. It wasn't critical. So yeah, yoke grabbers drive me crazy. So thanks for picking that up, and that is one of the things that I typically don't continue working with an instructor who's like that. I want feedback, but I also, Dennis, my other instructor at home, who I fly the steering with and did my tail endorsement with, my favorite sound bite from him is typically, he'll be quiet for a while, and then he'll say something like, "This isn't going to end well." That's what I'm. And then you're like, oh, what am I missing here? And then he won't tell you. You'll just wait until it looks like you're not going to get it. And also, there's been multiple times in my videos where I've got sound bites of me saying, "Why did you let me do that?" He's like, "Ah, it didn't break the airplane. But you're not going to do it again, are you?" So there's been a couple of those things where I've had horrible landings where he's like, I knew you were flying too high, but it was a horrible bounce and you saved it, or you made the decision to go around, so I'll let you just do it. Those instructors are trying to pretend they're not there, so that when they're not there, you're okay. And that's what it's all about with flight training. Yeah, you're going to be on your own to do this, so you need someone that can get you to that place where you can make those decisions and do it with confidence. And you can't do that with a guy who always fixed it for you, or who fixed it so quickly and thinks that by doing that he just taught it to you. It's like, no, that didn't teach it to me. That just frustrated me, and now I'm not even sure I know what the hell I'm doing at all. Right? Because sometimes you would have fixed it 5 seconds later. But if they get on it so quickly, you're like, oh, you probably would have noticed it in your flow. Or, you know, but if you don't, they let it go so long, it's like clearly you weren't going to get that thing. And that's where Dennis's "this isn't going to end well" thing comes into play. Because that forces you to find it. And if you don't find it, then it's like, dude, like your prop is not fine and we're about to take off, or whatever. So that kind of thing.
So I want to say, Steve meets Scott. He might know where you can get a virtual into a Texan.
Okay.
Can you ever shave the chops now?
I shave them all the time. I'm just lucky they grow fast. So whenever I'm not doing one of these things, they're typically, I just let it turn into a beard.
Aviator first or creator first?
Well, I guess creator first. Oh, that's hard to say. I mean, I was a 5-year-old looking at airplanes wanting to fly. The root of it is my grandfather flew Spitfires in World War II, so I always heard those stories. So I never didn't want to be a pilot, and I started trying to, my original thing was I was going to be an air cadet and get trained in Canada that way, but I didn't like polishing boots and marching, and that didn't work out, so I wasn't really a military guy. And then I saved the money when I was 15, and at that point in the 90s, it would have been $3,000 to get your private if you did it in minimums. So I had that money from a part-time job when I was 15, but then there were cars and girls. So I bought a car when I was 16, an 85 Scirocco Volkswagen, Volkswagen Scirocco, and didn't do it and start. So it wasn't until I was about 20 that I finally got it together and started. I started soaring. At the time I was in film school, so I guess I was a creator first, but I always knew I wanted to be a pilot. So yeah, I've kind of been a 20-year filmmaker and a 20-year pilot, merging together 5 years. I started the channel in 2013 as a vacation from what I didn't enjoy about where TV work had become about reality TV. That's where I got to this stage. Yeah.
Yeah, I found your last video about jumping out of the airplane really fascinating. And after I watched all the other videos, you were pretty uncomfortable with that, it seemed like. And so I wanted to ask, were you really that uncomfortable with it? And do you remember much about your thoughts before that parachute actually opened? And what was that whole experience like for you personally?
Yeah, so the main thing I want to hinge on with your question was that real? I left reality TV because it's not real. I was like, I want to make the flying content that I don't think exists, which is real. I want to put someone in the place of a GA pilot, weekend warrior, doing their best, and I don't care, I got nothing to prove. Originally, I did have people call me up and say, man, you're an idiot, or you suck, or whatever. Or that landing was terrible. A lot of times it'd be like, the title of the video was like, terrible landing. So, yeah, that's what it's about. So, the answer to the question is, that video where I covered my first skydive, I went there not intending to do it. Like, I even told them, like, I'm going there because I want to fly the H-18, I want to fly the DC-3, and I'll go ride in the King Air, and you can talk about skydive ops, that's great. I'm not going to jump out, but great. Of course, being there, it's like, dude, come on. I was like, all right, fine. But no, yeah, I wasn't too excited about it. It's just, to me, skydiving, my biggest fear of flying is structural failure when the airplane is broken and you are now just a piece of metal falling out of the sky and nothing you can do. So skydiving to me is kind of like one step away from that. So, yeah, jumping out of an airplane at 20,000 feet was difficult. But once I jumped out, it was, I remember all of it. What was it, 2-minute free fall? Yeah, it was surreal, man. They talked about flying with your body, and I got that impression a little bit. I mean, when you're tandem, you can't exactly fly that well, but I did feel like, all right, my arms are actually like ailerons, this is kind of cool. But I don't have a lot of need to do it again. But I did it. It was fun, but I don't want to keep flipping that coin. I don't know. I feel like, I don't like the idea of my body being a landing gear either. I feel like a bad landing in an airplane is embarrassing and expensive. Bad landing in a skydive is life-changing. I mean, I'm pretty sure that I could crash an airplane. My flying idol, Bob Hoover, you know, he's got an awesome book, by the way. If you haven't read it, Forever Flying, highly recommend it for anyone that's interested in aviation. His kind of best quote is fly the airplane all the way into the crash. He's also got a record of being the test pilot that crashed the most airplanes. And it's not because it was bad, it's because most test pilots bail when it breaks. It would break and then he'd be like, okay, it's still flying, hang on a second. So he brought back so many broken airplanes that the engineers were like, oh, the last one was just spoken crater because the test pilot bailed, so we don't know why. The test pilot reported what happened, he's like, I don't know. But Bob Hoover bring it back, and he got hurt a few times by having really bad landing in airplanes that didn't have much of the wing left or broke tail or whatever it was. But yeah, fly the airplane all the way to crash. In a skydive situation, the crash is your legs or your spine or something. I don't know. I'm not too excited about that. Yeah, so Andrew, I don't know where we are at time.
Probably a couple more questions.
Okay, yep.
So I actually, just to preface this, I'm a student pilot myself, and I sold about a week ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm just starting my cross countries, and a lot of the emphasis that we're going on right now is ADM. And I want to know what, as a, I guess more solo in your case, because you do fly with all this here, but I guess Jason, you're very adept at this as well. What was the most uncomfortable position you've ever put yourself in as an aviator, and what ADM or lapses in ADM led to that, and what did you learn about that?
Yeah, that's cool. We're gonna really get drilling into those types of things, because that is kind of the root of my channel as well. One of my first videos that really got a lot of traction was a really innocuous moment where I shared what was probably one of the potentially most dangerous situations I've ever been in, which was the VFR into IMC kid situation. And it was a day where I thought I did everything right. You know what I mean? Like, I won't tell the whole story because it's long, but the end result of it was I did my weather briefing. Should have been fine. It was a case of lake effect snow was in the area, but it wasn't supposed to get to where we were going. And en route, visibility just kept dropping. And I was so close to home, I knew where I was. It was get home itis, classic sort of case. And visibility just kept dropping, but I knew if I follow the lake shore, I'm going to get there. It's not supposed to be here. It's not forecast to be here. It's not supposed to be here. I kept telling myself that. And I remember as it got to a point where it's like, I don't even think this is 3 miles, 2 miles. Like, what am I in anymore? And I called the tower because I knew it was 10 miles away. And I'll never forget the way the tower said it, because at the time I didn't fully understand what it was doing for me, but he heard my voice probably shaking on the radio. I asked him what the visibility was, and he said, I'm reporting 3 miles. He said it in a very official way, which I know now is because he was not going to make me go through the awkwardness and have to ask for special VFR, which I probably wasn't going to think of doing at the time because I was flustered. He knew that I was going to make it, the visibility was still acceptable, but it definitely was no longer VFR. But when I got into the approach for that one, the other thing that was horrible about that situation was it was flying towards Toronto Island Airport. The wind was really strong from the north, which is what happened. That was not forecasted, brought the lake effect snow further south. That's why the visibility was dropping. I couldn't get cleared to land on the runway that I ended up seeing because it was runway 08. And I wanted to just land where I was looking at, I was heading that way, but the wind was 30 knots, gusting like to 35 or more. So he cleared me to land on the northbound runway, which meant I had to turn and face the lake, which now meant I got nothing. Now it's IMC. So I did this thing where I just kind of watched the airport with no hope of any kind of horizon in front of me. Just kind of did like a complete constant turn. I never did like a proper circuit or anything. I just brought it into that runway, and I told myself, I'm not overshooting this, because if I do, I'm going to climb into the city with like the CN Tower in Toronto, which is almost 2,000 feet high, into like IMC. So that was probably the stupidest, scariest situation I found myself in, and it was all because of just failing to like do a bunch of my SOPs that I should have known about, and I should have made the decision to do a 180 lots. I got a few of those stories.
And they're all FlightChops videos.
And they're all, most of them are videos, yeah.
Steve, we'll do one more, is that right? One more question. All right, so last question here.
All right, so we'll end this on a creative question. You've been on YouTube for a while. I know you do patrons to monetize it, by the way.
Appreciate it.
And I'm curious to see if you have changed, if you have seen any change in the platform, because the landscape has changed a lot on YouTube, and if you're exploring other platforms as well to distribute your video and get some reach.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess I want to start it by saying I started being a YouTube aviator in 2013. There wasn't a lot of us doing it. My biggest fear right now is that I'm setting an example for people that I want to make sure they understand. What I do is all about, the birth of it was debriefing. All my stuff is separate for edit. It drives me crazy when I see vloggers in airplanes talking to the camera. It's like, you have no business, just fly. If you want to film your flying, okay, cool. And if you want to publish it afterwards, okay, cool. Don't live stream it in a real airplane. I just highly suggest you don't do that. It's just asking for trouble. At best, maybe you do a rig bust and you ended up live streaming your rig bust. At worst, you're distracting yourself unnecessarily and God knows what could happen. So Twitch and the live streaming things, I don't think apply to what I want to do in terms of actually live streaming a flight. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that is the point I wanted to make. I think debriefing is really important. I think it's really cool to fly with GoPros. Just please don't make it a selfie. Don't make it about that. It took me a long time to even decide to turn the camera on myself. It was my friend James, who's a director, who said, if you really want to do this seriously, you've got to put the U in YouTube. And that's how the brand all became a joke that I had this mustache on during November and we came up with a thing because I play the drums, so I'm often working my drum chops, like practicing. It's like FlightChops, which is easy brand based on the thing. Turning the camera became also about watching where I'm looking and like, that was part of the debrief. But I don't ever talk to the camera to my viewers while flying. I just don't. So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but I haven't really explored other platforms. Although I'm getting more and more frustrated by YouTube because it's harder and harder to reach your own subscribers. The algorithm decides who to send your stuff to, even though someone has clicked the button. And it's like if you click subscribe, also click the bell, but also go into the bell submenu and click if you want always, sometimes, or algorithm. It's like, are you serious? So you want me to spend a minute making a call to action in every video explaining to my subscribers what they need to do to actually subscribe? So that's extremely frustrating as a creator. But I get it because a lot of people now are subscribed to 100+ channels, so every single time. And also YouTube rewards frequent publishing and lots of watch time. So I mean, people are vlogging, getting their coffee, right? I mean, I try real hard to make content that's valuable. I put a lot of work in the editing. I respect people's time. So if my video is 22 minutes long, which makes me cringe, if I break 20 minutes, I really try hard not to. You better believe it's worth it. Like my first lesson in the T6 is 22 minutes or something because I just couldn't make it any shorter. But I work real hard. Sometimes my last day of editing is just trimming out 30 seconds. I go back over and tighten the whole thing up. Because if I can get it from 21:30 to 19:58, I'll do that. Because I think it looks better when you're about to click on a video that's not 20 minutes. It's like $1.99, it's not $2, you know what I mean? So I try to do that, and I try to respect people's time. So I don't know, I think live streaming is a really interesting thing, and I think the sim world, I think it definitely works. I think that's very cool to see how that happens for you guys. For flying, I will never live stream a flight. I don't see the point, and I just think it's asking for trouble.
All right, well, thanks for all that, Steve.